everybody, Eric Schweitzer here for The Gamer. Welcome to the final episode of our Game of the Year series. Today we are joined by features editor Andrew King. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing, Eric?
Good, I'm excited. We are here to talk about The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, your choice for Game of the Year 2023.
Yes, certainly. I'm ready to talk about it. The long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild is finally here.
And fans can't get enough.
That's right.
So, where should we begin? Because it's a great game and everyone knows it. The end.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, let's wrap it up there.
This is our final one, and every single video we've done so far, we've gone like, whatever. This game's great. Resident Evil's great. Alan Wake's great, but it's not going to beat Zelda and or Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
So why is it that, in your opinion, that Zelda and Baldur's Gate, but why is Zelda the front runner here for this one?
Well, I think it's because the sort of TLDR of it all is that it's the sequel to a game that a lot of people in the games press and also just regular players think is easily one of the best games of all time, and it improves on a lot of things that Breath of the Wild did. So it's in that situation, does it become Game of the Year sort of by default because it's the sequel to such an acclaimed game and is shoring up the weaknesses that game had? That's sort of what makes it difficult to talk about. And I think something that I've written about in some of my articles is that we've never had a Game Awards winner that was the sequel to another winner. And so if Tears of the Kingdom does that, it'll be, a first. But that may be where Baldur's Gate 3 has the edge, right? Is that gamers may feel like, critics and audiences who vote on this may feel like we have played this game before. Baldur's Gate 3 is something that feels a little newer. But we'll just have to see how that shakes out.
So let's talk about the sequel of it all, because I think before the game came out, there was a lot of fear that this was just a big overpriced DLC for Breath of the Wild. And still today, and I obviously this is much made in bad faith, but I see plenty of comments on our other videos that Breath of the Wild is just still the same game. That Tears of the Kingdom is the same game that Breath of the Wild was. Obviously, you don't feel that way.
No,
right?
I don't. And to me, the ways that they're similar actually points to sort of a healthier way to approach sequels. You and I have talked about, and I've written a lot about how games, all game sequels now are legacy sequels, right? We're getting ready to hear about Grand Theft Auto 6 getting announced on Tuesday. They'll have the trailer. And that's a game that's coming out. If it comes out next year, like a lot of people are expecting, it's going to have been 11 years since the game that it is the sequel to. And when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, which will probably be towards the end of this decade, given the cycle that Bethesda seems to be on, that game is going to have been 17, 18 years in the making. And Nintendo didn't make Tears of the Kingdom quickly. I think a lot of people expected sort of a Majora's Mask turnaround because it was building on Breath of the Wild. And they didn't make it that quickly. It still took 6 years. But it points to a future where these games can stop being afraid of reusing assets and realize that an entirely new world, an entirely new set of animations, entirely new 3D models aren't what makes a game good. It's the verbs of what you do in the game. And that's the big thing that Tears of the Kingdom does is different than Breath of the Wild that makes me think, no, this isn't just DLC. Is that it's very rare for DLC to say, okay, we're taking out all the mechanics you are used to from that game and putting new ones in. And Tears of the Kingdom still has swinging a sword and a lot of it feels the same, but the abilities that Link has that let him interact with objects in Hyrule are completely different than what he had in Breath of the Wild, and that to me makes it feel like a brand new game. not to mention all the stuff that actually is new, like the depths below Hyrule and the, you know, islands in the sky that build out that map beyond what it was in Breath of the Wild.
Right, and the map itself, like Hyrule itself, is so much different.
Right, yeah, I mean, I haven't played a lot of the Yakuza games, but I know that something that people who really like the Yakuza games appreciate about them is the way that they reuse Kamurocho over and over and over again. And so each time you play a Yakuza game, you're like, okay, what's changed here? What's changed there? And you can go around the map and see all these subtle changes that you can only appreciate because you played the other games. And Tears of the Kingdom does that on a pretty gigantic scale. Like, the map is still like the same structure that it was in Breath of the Wild, but it's like none of those places are exactly the same as they were before, you know? Each one is like, oh, I wonder what they did on Eventide Island. I'll go see what Eventide Island did. And, you know, spoiler alert, if you go to Eventide Island, there's a new challenge that's waiting for you there that's different than the one that was there in Breath of the Wild. And that's true for every location you can think of. It's all been reworked in some way.
But the real evolution of Tears of the Kingdom, and it's been spoken about plenty, that I think we've started to sort of take it for granted, is the building aspect of it, which is like something that we've seen that idea before, but never at this level. And it feels like one of those things that when you experience it, you're like, I didn't know a video game could do that.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of moments like that, right? Like, I mean, a lot of the joy of Breath of the Wild was watching for years as like people on YouTube or Twitter were sharing videos of like themselves doing wild stuff that you didn't know you could accomplish in the game. And Tears of the Kingdom is built to facilitate those moments in a way that Breath of the Wild just wasn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think about, there's this one I keep coming back to where this person built a like big airship that they were flying around, and then built smaller drones into the airship that they could deploy, and then they would infiltrate like a bokoblin skull base and, like, you know, exterminate all the bokoblins with extreme prejudice. And to me, that is like, I could never imagine doing that, but it's incredible that the game facilitates doing that. And like, for me, I respond more to like, okay, you gave me a specific prompt that makes me think about the building mechanics in a cool way. Like, the shrines are really good for that. Like, there's one that I think caused quite a stir on game dev Twitter where there was like a suspension bridge that was all on one side of lava, and then you could connect the wheels to it, hit the wheels, and they would extend the suspension bridge over the lava, and you could walk across. And like, game developers are like, that is incredible. I can't believe they can do that. And like, to me as a player, it's pretty incredible. And that's just one of like 150 shrines or whatever there are in this game. And not all of them are that interesting. Like, there's more combat challenges in this game than there were in Breath of the Wild, which is sort of a downside of expanding the amount of shrines. But there are a ton of those that like are challenging you to use the building tools or the ascend ability or the fuse ability in cool ways that you wouldn't have thought of before.
Yeah. One thing that fascinated me so much watching other people play and discover this game was the repeated sentiment of like, oh, I did this the wrong way.
Yeah.
You know, like getting through a dungeon and being like, this wasn't how you're supposed to do it, but it worked. And every time I saw one of those, I was like, no, if you did it, that is how you were supposed to. Like, you're missing what is so incredible about this game. Like, however you do it is the right way to do it. And I think it's so hard. It's so hard for us to understand that, because everything we've always played had a design and an intention. And if you went outside the bounds of that design, you were, you know, going against what the designers wanted you to do. But that's not what Tears of the Kingdom is.
And I think it speaks to it borrowing sort of gameplay philosophy from games like Hitman and Dishonored and like immersive sims, but packaging it within the Zelda series, which is so mainstream. And like those are by and large PC games, and it's taking and putting it on the Switch is like the most accessible, approachable console you can play on, and that many millions of people own. And it is like, it feels like it sort of is breach containment, like these things that only people that were like into hardcore, you know, systems driven games could get down with before, now like kids know about. And I think it is sort of, that's going to make it a bit of a paradigm shift in a way that even Breath of the Wild wasn't, because its toolset is so much more robust. That it's like there are lots of kids that are growing up playing this game that are going to have that like mentality from now on, is that there's no right way to solve a puzzle. If I can solve it, then that's the right way, right?
Yeah. I think that's so well put. It does feel like the kind of super crunchy, systems-driven game that only us, like, hardcore PC nerds grew up with. And now it's the biggest Nintendo game of all time. Like, couldn't be more on the opposite end of the spectrum of games.
And I wonder if this year is going to be like a hinge point year that we look back on and are like, that's the year that like that kind of play really became mainstream, between this and Baldur's Gate 3, which are both so, like you said, crunchy and like both so like focused on player agency and giving you the tools to figure out how to do something in a variety of ways, not just one correct way. And obviously like Minecraft has been big for over a decade, so it's not like this is all new. Like creative play is new, but it is like it's been packaged in a way that mainstream players can like get into in a way that maybe they couldn't before.
Right. Yeah. I was just about to bring up Minecraft too. And I just think like this Zelda bridges more audiences together. Because like Minecraft has a massive player base, but it is still a more specific one than just Nintendo's big new Zelda game is.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, it is weirdly like this, I feel like, is a way that older players can get in, because Minecraft is so big with like a younger audience. Like it's something like Five Nights at Freddy's, which I think like surprised a lot of people with how big the movie ended up being, because it's like a Gen Z franchise. I think Zelda, because like players that like are our age grew up playing like Ocarina of Time, or who are older, maybe, you know, the SNES and NES games, they can look at this and like get into it in a way that they wouldn't if it's like something like Minecraft that like looks weird, or like Roblox that's like off-putting to their like, you know, sensibilities. This is something that's packaging it in a way that like gamers of all ages can sort of pick up and appreciate.
I think the biggest shame of this game is that it was released on the Switch. Yeah,
I think that's sort of the shame with a lot of like big Nintendo games, is you can only imagine how much like modders could do with it, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and just how much better the presentation would be on a more sophisticated platform. Yeah. Because my first impression of this game was pretty negative. I just thought it looked terrible. And I settled into it and I got over it, because there's so much incredible things to love about this game. But I just looking at the screen, I was like, this looks bad.
Yeah. I think that's especially true 6 years removed from Tears of the Kingdom. Like, because it doesn't really look...
From Breath of the Wild.
From Breath of the Wild. Because it doesn't really look any better than Breath of the Wild, despite being at the end of this console generation instead of at the beginning. Like, systemically, what Nintendo is accomplishing, I feel like they wouldn't have been able to do with Breath of the Wild, because they have this much more experience with the hardware. But like graphically, it's not really a step up. So that is like definitely a hit against it. Is like it could be like as robust as it is systemically, and also like better graphically if it was on PS5 or Xbox Series X or whatever.
Yeah. Do you think, sort of a segue here, does that have anything to do with the way it has kind of fallen out of the conversation, or is that just the march of time and how many games we've had to deal with?
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of things, right? Because in 2017 it came out, and I feel like it was still sort of dominating the conversation by like this time at the end of that year, or Breath of the Wild was.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a combination of doesn't feel as new as that did. Like that game felt so like just revelatory in a way that this game doesn't. I think that this game is still doing very cool things, but there are things that you have to sort of pay a little more attention to appreciate than like the simple pitch of like open world Zelda feels completely new. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's because it's a sequel, and because it's not a sequel in the way that Breath of the Wild was a sequel, right? Like Breath of the Wild was like the 20th Zelda game or whatever, but it felt new because it was doing something so completely new. And this is, you know, also a sequel, but doesn't feel quite as new because it's building on that. It's like, it's the case where it's like, you can look at this game and be like, yeah, it's pretty much better than Breath of the Wild in every way that I could conceive of, but it's not making the same big splash because people have played Breath of the Wild already. It's like, if we just got it beamed into our, like, if we just got Tears of the Kingdom with no Breath of the Wild, I feel like it would break people's brains and they would still be like, it would be the unquestioned game of the year, but because we played something so familiar, it just is sort of getting not as much acknowledgement as it maybe deserves.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I culturally, I remember when it launched and my feed was nothing but Big Macs and discoveries. And now I see nothing ever. And it kind of gives the impression that everything about this game that can be discovered has been. And I know that's not true. But I see nothing but Baldur's Gate. Yeah. I see interactions and moments and a lot of smooching. I think that's a big selling point, is the smooching. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's gonna have a hard time for those reasons that you've mentioned. But it's still those two, right? Those two are still the front runners.
I mean, I think so. I think like Alan Wake got as many nominations as Baldur's Gate did, so it's sort of ahead of Tears of the Kingdom in that way. But I think that game's a critical favorite much more than it is an audience favorite, just because I don't think nearly as many people have played it. Yeah. I think like Tears of the Kingdom dominated the first half of the year. Baldur's Gate dominated the second half of the year. There were a bunch of other games released that had their pockets of conversation, but I feel like if you're talking about what dominated, what people were talking about, it was Tears of the Kingdom than Baldur's Gate. And Alan Wake, like, people who played it were like, this is incredible. This has some of the best levels I've ever seen in a game. But it's just a question of like the Game Awards are ultimately like, you know, a popularity contest. It's who's played the most stuff that can like, or which game has been played the most, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's Alan Wake, and that's sort of a bummer for Remedy. And I still haven't played that game. I would like to play it. I haven't had time with because I bought, you know, Mario and Spider-Man the week before, so I didn't have the money to buy it. But yeah, I think it's between Zelda and Baldur's Gate.
Been a problem this year.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Any final words on Tears of the Kingdom?
I think it rules, and I'm excited to play some more of it on my Nintendo Switch.
That's it for our Game of the Year series. Let us know down in the comments which game you think should win Game of the Year at the Game Awards this year. Check out Andrew's full argument in favor of Tears of the Kingdom, link down in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's The Gamer, no space.